Hello, everybody, and welcome to Roar Lions Roar. Yes, that's right. I nailed it the first time, even though this is the first time I haven't had to say Roar Lions Radio. This is your host tonight, Nick Pollock, and I am joined by, finally, after 6 long years of waiting to finally get on the podcast, Mr. Craig Fritz. How
6 years,
are
baby.
you?
We're doing very well. I think the only other podcast I was on was the Minnesota preview in 2016. And we all know how that worked out. So Irv Charles went 80 yards for a touchdown. The rest is history. So let's keep that juju going.
So that fact, combined with the fact that preseason 2016 was also the last time that Penn State was not ranked in the AP poll, seems like good things are ahead for the Nittany Lions this season.
Well, this is why I'm here. But, I'm not really surprised that they're unranked. 7-6 with a deplorable O-line. You have questions at running back. Your best wide receiver got drafted in the first round. People are down on Clifford. It's not, to me, it's not surprising at all that they're outside the top 25. They're going to have to make a show of it to get back in that. So, and again, preseason polls are for conversation. So everybody's talking about it. Like, oh, wow, Penn State's not in the top 25. So they're just going to have to earn their way back in.
Yeah, I think the spot they're in makes total sense, right? They're in that 26 to 30 range. I believe they're technically 29th if the voting went out that far. Like, that's the exact spot that you expect to see teams that everyone's like, wow, they're really talented, but I have a lot of question marks. So it's an easy, like, oh yeah, I'll pop them up to 25 that win week 1. Like, it's an easy starting place for a team like Penn State. I agree. I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, like we said, it's first time since preseason 2016 they haven't been in the top 25, and that was a pretty darn good year and kicked off a good series of years for James Franklin and Penn State, which makes sense because a lot of this Penn State team, it is kind of a refresh. I know Sean Clifford is back again, but this is the first time in a while that we've had the same offensive coordinator. There's a lot of new pieces moving. Like, it's a good kind of soft reset on kind of where Penn State is at in general. And I think a really good representation of that reset is the position group we're going to talk about tonight, and that's the linebackers. It's a bit of a different, it's a really similar situation, but different in a lot of ways too, because, we have that kind of the kid that we're pretty sure is a stud in terms of, we look at Curtis Jacobs.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot of questions, especially at middle linebacker. But before we get too deep into any certain thing, just give me kind of your overview, like your eagle eye view of the linebacker room at Penn State right now.
So, you go into this offseason and then you lose Brooks, you lose Smith, you lose Lucetta, and you look at it and you say, oh, wow, recruiting has been nice the last 2 years, but the guys on the roster there's not a whole lot of bodies. So you know that they wanted someone in the portal. That seemed to be a priority, just like defensive end and guard, and it didn't come to fruition. So now you're left with the guys you already had on the roster. So we know Jacobs is a stud. We think he's going to continue to elevate his game, continue to excel. He's just a freak athlete. I don't want to say he's in the mold of Micah Parsons, but he knows the game. He's very well-rounded, and they're going to lean on him as the go-to guy. And then you have Jonathan Sutherland. He moved from safety. He was kind of like the hybrid backer last year. He's linebacker full-time. And then outside of that, you have a lot of question marks. And so let's dig into it. But, I mean, that's why we're talking about linebackers. There are so many things that are going to – this is really a mixed bag this year. You don't know what to expect. So –
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the guys you named, obviously, those are going to be kind of the key names to watch for. Just a couple other notes here. Freshman Ken Talley was slated to at least start his Penn State career at linebacker, has entered the portal, which was a bit of a surprise, given that he was one of the vocal leaders of this most recent recruiting class. But, it is what it is in the portal era.
Yeah.
Kids don't feel like they fit where they are, and that's totally fine. Go find somewhere better. That's cool. The other name, Charlie Katcher, we know he was in a sling during the spring game, but we haven't really heard anything else since then. Common sense, I guess, would dictate that he's probably still hurt. And, that given how many injuries he's dealt with over the course of his career, probably a safe bet. But, he could end up factoring in somewhere along the depth chart this season. We've kind of seen him move all over. So I I hesitate to kind of give a prediction as to where he would play exactly. But that's just a couple other names to watch. So I think, like you said, it's an interesting place that the linebacking core is in right now, because you have the obvious talent, but you also have a lot of questions, and those question marks come with a lot of talent themselves. Like Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King, the two guys fighting for the middle linebacker job, we know that they are talented. The question is, one, do they have what it takes to be in the middle of a Big Ten defense right now? But two, also, how much does it really take? Because we didn't have high expectations of Ellis Brooks going into last year. Like he was fine. I think we all thought he was fine. And he really stepped up, not by using necessarily any outstanding physical tools. Like obviously he's a Big Ten linebacker. Like he's a great athlete, much better athlete than you or I. But, compared to the other guys on the field on his side and the other side, like it's not like he was a standout athlete, but he got by on just playing intelligently and understanding where he needed to be. So the question is, how long does it take in a progression of a college athlete to kind of get to the point that he was at? And I think the other thing I wanted to kind of focus on is I'm interested to see what the use of the Sam linebacker actually looks like with Manny Diaz, because we saw under Brent Pry, the Sam linebacker last year, that was Curtis Jacobs. That was the most subbed out spot on this defense. Right. They would frequently take, I think that's not uncommon for any defense, right? That's the position you take off in order to bring on a nickel corner or something, or an extra safety, whatever it is. But I'm curious to see if Manny Diaz has a similar philosophy, because, they've said that there is that Sam position, but it's kind of a hybrid between a typical Sam linebacker, and then I think they're calling it like the striker. It was their version of the star or hybrid, whatever you want to call it. The
hero, the star, yeah.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. Which, I mean, if you're going to pick a guy to do that, probably a good choice to have it be a safety who understands the defense probably more than anyone there, considering how long he's been there, in Jonathan Sutherland. So excited to see what he can do. I'm curious. I think I know the answer, but in your mind, what is the biggest question mark when it comes to this unit?
Well, it's definitely the depth. I mean, you have the top line guys, right? And whether the Mike ends up being King or Elsdon, you have Jacobs and you have Sutherland. And in my mind, the thing that's going to force Manny Diaz's hand is he has an elite secondary. And what you guys talked on the pod yesterday, he has an extremely deep defensive line. I think they're going to be quick to sub out to just two backers, very consistently, whether that's a box safety, whether that's a nickel corner, whatever that extra player is, because there just is not the depth at the linebacker position to carry three backers on first, second, third down. So yeah, I mean, Sutherland, I think, has been there for a long time. He's a captain. He's well respected. He also is a guy that I believe is suited for a very specific role. So if you think back to a guy like Koa Farmer, and I'm not saying that they're the same athlete and the same player, but the Koa succeeded in places where he was given, do this job,
definitely
do it extremely well, make plays. And I feel like Jonathan Sutherland is that type of player where if he is asked to do everything, he may struggle. Where is he asked to do a specific job? Is he asked to blitz? Is he asked to do whatever it may be? I think he can excel there with, I don't want to say limited reps, but it's a position they're going to have to be very careful with subbing out. And, like you said, Pry was very aggressive with taking that backer off, especially with all the passing that we face now in college football. I think that Diaz is going to have to do similar things with the linebacker core.
Yeah, I don't even think it's unfair to say limited reps when it comes to Sutherland, because if he was a guy that was going to be a true difference maker on the defense, like he's had the opportunities to do that, right? Like he's been on the field a lot over the last few years, so I feel like he's a pretty. I mean, I guess we don't know exactly what he looks like as a linebacker, but overall, he's a fairly known commodity. I really like the Koa Farmer kind of connection there. And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking in my head, I'm like, I totally agree with that. And I'm wondering kind of what is Jonathan Sutherland's niche? Like, what is that thing that he is better equipped to do than other players on the defense? And I think that's an interesting. I mean, I would assume playing the run,
but again, who knows? You know, he's not a huge guy.
Yeah.
I feel like he has, like, look at his strengths. He's been a special teams captain, right? So he has very aggressive straight line speed. Does he have the instincts to cut down the angle? There's been questions about that, just, you know, watching his game film from last year and the year before. Can you give him a role where it's playing the run, it's blitzing, it's, you know, picking up the tight end and pass coverage? I honestly don't know. But obviously that will go ahead.
I think the other thing that the other kind of factor that may keep him on the sideline more than I'm sure he would want to be, to your point about depth, right now his backup is former walk-on Dom DeLuca. Now, I'm not saying that DeLuca can't play. I'm not implying that. I don't think I've seen DeLuca play, so I can't really even say that. But I would think that the staff would rather not be in a position where they have to play a walk-on, because it's not like they lack names at the linebacker.
Sure.
Like, they have a ton of highly rated recruits and a ton of people that can play the linebacker position. So, you know, DeLuca has clearly earned this spot, but how comfortable are you having him out there against Ohio State in the third quarter, for example? Like, is that a situation you really want to be in? So I would imagine they kind of protect Sutherland's reps a little bit just for the sake of staying healthy at the same time. For me, I do have big questions about the depth, but for me, I think my biggest question is just who's going to play Mike? I think Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King both have a ton of talent, and I think they're pretty different players, honestly, though, in the end. Like, Elsdon seems to be much more of I don't want to say Mike Hall because he's not Mike Hall, but, you know, Mike Hall's style of play. Like, Mike Hall was not the guy that was going to just stand in the middle of the field and wait for the play to come to him. Like, he was constantly moving downhill at every single moment. Right. Just a heat-seeking missile. One of my absolute favorite players to watch at Penn State. If I could pick one player to add to this Penn State team this year, I think it'd be Mike Hall.
I know you've really wanted to talk to him about him for a while. I mean, you can just go back to last year. We were just talking about Ellis Brooks. If you can get a player at the mic that is not necessarily the most athletically gifted, but is in the right position to make the play or funnel the play to the players, you know, funnel the tackle to Curtis Jacobs or any of the ridiculous players they have in the secondary, that's something that you're going to need. So
yeah, totally. And that's what
Michael.
Yeah,
I do love Michael though.
To me, I think Kobe King is the one that sounds more, his style of play more matches what Ellis Brooks brings or brought to the table and brings, still playing. To me, Kobe King, you know, for a lot of reasons, fits that mold a bit more. We know he's not the most athletic dude out there, but he's a bowling ball. He knows how to read defenses, and he comes from, you know, a really highly touted high school, comes from Cass Tech in Detroit. That is a big time high school, big time environment. And if you can't play, you're not going to play at Cass Tech. Like that, the fact that he was their starting middle linebacker, I believe, for 3 years, that's a big deal. Like that, it takes a lot of talent and a lot of smarts to be able to fill that role. So clearly, he has what it takes to be a good middle linebacker. And honestly, I don't think there's a wrong answer between these two. And first, we're going to see both. Like this is not going to be a situation where we just see one of them and the other one is like a special teamer only. They're both going to play a lot, and maybe it's even like situational. Like maybe when we're playing a team like Wisconsin, although we don't play Wisconsin this year, but maybe when we're playing a run heavy team, maybe Elsdon gets more snaps because he's probably going to be the more aggressive run stopper. And maybe when we're playing a team like Ohio State, or if it's an Ohio State drive where we know they're going to throw the ball, we see more Kobe King because we know he can be more of a field general. So it's not necessarily a question mark in like I'm scared, although I would much rather there be a definitive answer at the Mike linebacker position. But I think that's for me, that's one of the more fascinating things happening with this Penn State team. think the other thing I wanted to touch on before we talk about our wonderful sponsor, I just want to know how confident you feel in a guy like Jamari Budden coming in behind Curtis Jacobs at the will linebacker position. He's a guy who, we've and not even just him specifically, but any of these youngsters that we see at linebacker. Youngsters, I sound so old.
Those whippersnappers.
Any of these kids that we see at linebacker, like we've seen Penn State just continually find the next dude at linebacker. Where is kind of your just general comfort at with their ability to do that, knowing that Brent Pry isn't here anymore? Like that position coach is gone. I'm curious if you feel as confident in them overall as you did previously.
That's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about it. You assume that, Pry had this mold of the player he was looking for, and these guys are on the roster, right? So you assume that they're going to be able to handle the things that they'll need to handle. But that's the beauty of college football, right? It's not like the pros where you have a guy that signed for 7 years. He's going to be your middle linebacker. That's the case. You are always replacing studs, and it just hit Penn State in an unfortunate situation to lose basically 3 starters and then have a guy like Charlie Katcher be a question mark of his availability. And so like Jamari Budden's going to have to play. Curtis Jacobs can't play every snap of every game. It's not possible. He's going to have to play. Obviously, Elsdon and King are going to have to play. Who are the next guys up? And then you get into, can the true freshmen contribute in a meaningful way and not burn their red shirts? Like, is a guy like Abdul Carter have the ability to step in and take some reps away? I tend to think that a guy like that will play when there's a blowout in the early season, or some game that gets out of hand later in the year. But it's going to be really interesting, especially you're going to have injuries too. That's just a fact of college football, football in general. So you're going to have these guys try baptism by fire. And, God forbid, we're talking about 2016 earlier, we get into a situation where we were in Michigan in 2016 and you lose, boom, 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 linebacker out, linebacker ejected.
Poor
linebacker tears a
Brown.
knee. Yeah, God. And this is the position that cannot absorb that on this team right now. So there's no choice but to have these guys ready to play. So Jamari's going to have to play a lot of football. Kalen King's going to have to play a lot of football. I don't think Carter and Wiley are going to play a lot of football, but they're probably going to hear their numbers called early in the season, at very least, to get their feet wet.
Totally. So if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you might notice the fact that both Craig and I are wearing 2 beautiful, now unfortunately defunct, Roar Lions Roar t-shirts. And, it's unfortunate that we've had to close our merchandise store's doors for at least the time being. But lucky for you, there is a wonderful new line of Penn State apparel out there that you can purchase today. And that's from our friends over at Home Field, our new sponsor of this podcast. If you're listening to this now, you did unfortunately miss Big New Saturday for their Penn State line, in which, if you didn't see, Penn State did become the new leader in they have a competition every time they do a Big New Saturday release, where it's a competition between the schools to see who can buy the most merchandise on that first day. And Penn State overtook Florida and is now the all-time leader of the Big New scoreboard. Could maybe be in trouble this weekend with Ohio State. I kind of doubt it, but they're talking a big game, so who knows? Of course, there's always the nice, if you're an Ohio State fan, I'm sure you have the extra bonus of wanting to beat Penn State in yet another thing. So maybe that'll be a little extra motivation for them. But if you have not already purchased something from Home Field, honestly, do yourself the favor of, improving your wardrobe. This is when I get this order, this will be my first shipment from them. And I've said on the podcast before, it wasn't because I didn't want to have Home Field stuff before. It's just that it got to a certain point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold out. I'm going to wait for the Penn State gear. I feel like that should be the first thing that I get from them. And I'm really excited for my shirts. They look amazing. Craig, do you have any Home Field stuff already?
I don't have any stuff, but I did place my first order as well. We're waiting a couple hoodies for the wife and I got a t-shirt where, we're going to look fresh for 2022 in the big run.
Which T-shirt did you go with?
I got the We Are with the lion, the navy with the block We Are with the Lion Shrine lion. So I'm pretty excited about that. Got the gray PSU hoodie. Apparently the quality, I think, is what separates home field from a lot of other, anyone can slap a design on a shirt. We did it.
And also, I think if you're listening to this and you've bought merchandise from us before, this is what it's going to remind you of. It's a very similar process. Our friends that did our merchandise, very similar, just a really personal touch. It's not like they just have a warehouse with 100,000 Gildan 100% cotton tees sitting waiting to get slapped a logo on. Like, it's not like that. They're high quality shirts. It's 50% polyester, 50% cotton, so it's not going to or it might shrink a little bit, but not as much as a cotton shirt would. But it's just they take a lot of time to, one, make great shirts, and two, they take a lot of time to make sure that they're designs that you care about. They pour through old yearbooks. They look at any old photos and archives they can find. Like they pay a really close attention to find really cool and meaningful stuff, and maybe logos that you haven't seen in 50, 40, 60 years. Like, they're making an effort to make it special for you. I got the wrestling shirt with the little Nittany Lion, like cartoon on it. And I didn't know that was like that version of the line, like, had been used before. We were talking with some other Penn State friends before, and somebody said that their dad had a poster with the little Nittany Lion playing all those different sports. And I was like, that, first of all, find me that poster, because that sounds amazing. But like, that's the kind of stuff that you're not going to get. One, you're not going to get it from Penn State itself. Like, I love Penn State. Their branding is very boring. They're not going to go out of their way to make a shirt like that. But it takes a special kind of caring to go back and find a design like that to connect to. So if you have never placed an order with Home Field before, you're in luck, because if you use the code ROAR, Lions Roar, all one word, all caps, at checkout, you can get 15% off of your first order. And honestly, that's I saved like $40 off of my offer, because I ended up buying
huge discount.
Yeah, I ended up buying a whole bunch of Penn State stuff for myself, my wife, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, and then I bought some Wazoo stuff for myself too, because I am also a Washington State fan at heart, thanks to my mom. But yeah, it's an amazing website, awesome people. If you didn't catch the pod where Bill was talking with Connor Hitchcock, their CEO, make sure to go back and find that. He talks a bit about more about their process. They also talk about some terrible Penn State Indiana football games, so that's fun too. But once again, use the code ROAR, Lions Roar, all caps, at checkout, 15% off from Home Field Apparel. Buy some Penn State shirts and buy some other stuff. They have a lot of cool stuff from random schools that you should definitely check out. But let's get back to talking about Penn State linebackers, because that's why we're really here.
LBU, baby.
We've talked a lot about Curtis Jacobs already, rightly so. He's phenomenal talent. I want to know whether he is closer to what Micah Parsons was, and let's just limit to Penn State, because Micah has ascended to a different stratosphere since he got to the NFL. Is he going to be closer to what Micah Parsons was, or closer to what Brandon Smith was? And I'll let you interpret that however you choose.
Honestly, I think he is an extremely well-rounded player who happens to be extremely talented. So obviously, guys like Micah Parsons are a once-in-a-generation talent. But I believe that Jacobs has the game and can impact a game more in the vein of Parsons than Brandon Smith, who, he had the knock. He was a freak athlete, huge dude, ran like a missile, and lost angles, missed tackles, didn't wrap up. And those type of knocks followed him all the way, into his professional career.
Yeah.
And I think Curtis Jacobs has the potential to be the next guy that can go to the next level and be a stud linebacker in the NFL. He has that pedigree, and I'm just excited to watch his development, because I think it's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah, I think when I think about Curtis Jacobs, I think the most telling, I guess the word is, the most telling kind of highlight or play that he's produced that kind of gives me confidence that he is not just some toolsy athlete that they're hoping can turn into something else. I think the interception against Illinois.
Oh my gosh. So good.
I don't want to talk about the Illinois game otherwise.
It was awful, but that was unbelievable.
Yeah, like that was just a very cerebral play that also required a ton of athletic ability in order to be able to pull that off. And when I saw that play, I thought Micah Parsons. I was like, that's the kind of play that Micah Parsons did make, and probably would have made a lot more of if he had if the whole 2020 situation hadn't gone down the way that it did. To me, I think he is. I love everything he said. I think he absolutely not worrying about kind of comparing those three as literal athletes, but comparing the impact that they made on the game. I really like the way you worded that. I totally agree. I think Jacobs definitely has a chance to be more of a game breaker like Parsons was. Like when I think about Brandon Smith, I hope he has a absolutely phenomenal NFL career. But to me, he's kind of like the baseball, like a prospect in baseball who's got like 70 grade tools across the board.
Sure.
But maybe then like a 40 hit tool. Like
sure.
It's like the kind of profile like if he hits, then he's going to be a Hall of Famer, and he doesn't ever really quite hit. Like that's what it reminds me of when I would think of Brandon Smith. And like I said, I hope he does great things, but he
Absolutely.
just never quite put it all together at Penn State. And it seems like Jacobs has already put it together more than Smith had, which is not a knock on Smith. It's a praise of Jacobs for sure.
I think it shows his elevated game. And like I said, just another year, and I'm excited to see what Manny Diaz can do with a player like this. I'm not saying that Brent Pry couldn't. Obviously, Brent Pry has had amazing players and will continue to at Virginia Tech, but I'm just excited to see a new voice in between Jacob's ears and see what he can become this year.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if there's one thing that we know about Manny Diaz and have been told will continue to be true about Manny Diaz is that he wants to create chaos. Like he wants to have opposing quarterbacks' heads just absolutely spinning, blitzes from all directions, creative blitzes. And not that Brent Pry didn't also do those things, but Brent Pry's primary goal at all times was just bend, don't break, right? Like don't give up the huge play. Just keep them in front, make the smart play. And it led to phenomenal results. And I know that Matt talked about this the other day on the podcast, but it's just a different style. And while Penn State's defense probably will give up a few more points this year, unless both Johnny Dixon and unless all three of Johnny Dixon, Kalen King, and Joey Porter Jr. just morph into future first-round picks. Unless that happens, they are probably going to give them more points this year, but it's going to be probably a much more exciting defense and one that creates a lot more turnovers. And Jacobs is going to be the key to that. Like he is such a good athlete and so smart that Diaz is going to be able to use him in some really, really fun ways. And he's going to be the linchpin in my opinion. Like he is the key to this defense.
I agree. And I think, we weren't talking about a specific role for Sutherland earlier as well. And can Manny Diaz unlock him in this chaotic, frenetic defense in a way that is, limiting reps, but also high impact plays? And like you said, they probably will give up more points, but creating more turnovers and flipping the field gives our offense an opportunity to score even more points, which obviously they need to do. I'm all in for the chaos and the crazy plays and the zombie nation moments, call them if you want, in the stadium that are, the norm instead of the exception for this defense.
Quick aside, just because you said zombie nation plays, and I was watching, I'd stumbled upon highlights from the Auburn game. And I think the single play from last year that I am most upset didn't end up counting was that Joey Porter Jr. scoop and score, because that was a quintessential whiteout explosion moment, and it's still going back. It's so much fun to watch, and I'm so sad that it was clearly not a fumble, but it was so cool. It makes me so sad that we didn't have that. I mean, I guess we did though. We did have it for 30 seconds. We thought it was real.
Yeah.
All right, last question before we get out of here. Once and for all, well, I guess not once and for all, because I'm going to add a qualifier at the end of the question, but who is going to be the first man up at Mike Linebacker? And is that same player going to be the first man up at Mike Linebacker at the end of the season?
It's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think Elsdon has, I don't want to call it the edge. I think the coaches are in a position where they perhaps trust him. So I think he's going to be the one that gets the start in West Lafayette. It's a tough offense to dissect. Brome does some crazy things. O'Connell can sling it all over the yard.
Yes, he can.
They lost some significant pieces at wideout, but there are tricks up the sleeve of the Boilermakers, and I think he's going to be the first one out there. It will be an interesting thing to see if he can hang as that game progresses. And then, like you said earlier, a run down your throat type of offense like Michigan, is that the guy you want, manning the middle? And then against Ohio State and against perhaps Auburn, perhaps Purdue, the teams that throw it around the yard a little bit more, are you looking for a guy like King in the middle more? So by the end of the season, I honestly could see a 50-50 split throughout the year, depending on their health. Just situationally, you have these guys that, the staff knows that they're thin. They're preparing these dudes, knowing that they're thin. I think they both have the talent to carry it all season long, but I don't think one is better than the other to say they're going to have like 80% of the playing time versus 20. It's probably going to be more like a 60-40, 55-45, 50-50 split situationally as the team as the opponent calls for. So
yeah,
it's like a non-answer, really. I mean,
no, but it's I agree though. Like we've talked about already. Like they're both going to play. They're both going to play a lot, and they both have different skill sets. Like they're not. It doesn't make sense to choose one and ride them and pretend the other one doesn't exist. That's not sensible. I agree. I think Elsdon is going to be the first one out there. It's because just the way you were introducing that. Can you imagine how terrified you would be if Penn State was ranked like number 3 going into this Thursday night opener I think it's a night game at West Lafayette?
Yeah.
Jesus. That would be horrifying. Oh my God. I mean, I guess David Bell not being there, I guess makes it a little bit better, but that is, I sincerely hope that Penn State never, ever, ever has to play a road game against Purdue while ranked as what is it? They've beaten they've beaten the number 2 team, 5 times as an unranked team, I think it is.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you just stymied Ohio State 3 years ago, last year against Iowa, just these plays and you're like, they can't be stopped. And
I love it so much.
That's the joy of college football. Just something completely unexpected, and just they absolutely hammered those teams.
Yeah. But like I was saying, Tyler Elsdon, I think, will be the one first on the line at Mike Linebacker. I do kind of think that as the year goes on, the playing time will shift a bit more into Kobe King's favor. If for no other reason than if Diaz really is able to unlock Jacobs to the degree that we think he can, I think the value of having a more field general type guy in the middle while Jacobs is just kind of running all over the field, going berserk, maybe a little bit higher than having the more downhill guy like Elsdon. Maybe not. I mean, maybe having both of them on there will just create ultimate chaos. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it tip a bit more in Kobe King's favor as the year goes on. But yeah, totally agree. They're both going to play a lot. And overall, I think this is going to be a really fascinating unit. I mean, I think it's going to be a really good defense overall. And I think the fact that when probably the biggest question on the entire defense is the Mike linebacker position, I would wager. And the fact that they have 2 guys that seem to be really capable of filling the role effectively, that's a pretty good sign and should portend big things for this defense. Before we get out of here, any final thoughts on the linebackers?
I mean, it's all going to come down to them just gaining experience, the young guys. Because like we said, there's going to be injuries. There's going to be situations that require people to step up. And it's the joy of college football, again, that you have guys coming in that have no experience, and all of a sudden the light turns on for them and they're ready to go and they make a difference. And you say, wow, that's a play that makes me get off my couch. And I'm excited to see which of these young guys, are the first for that to happen, and that they all have it by the end of the season. So it's going to be a fun year to watch.
Yeah, 100% agree. Thank you, Craig, for joining me tonight. I know it was kind of last minute to get you on here, but I'm very glad that we finally got you back after your near 6-year absence from the podcast. And you'll be hearing Craig's voice a lot more in the coming year than you have in the past, as we really dive forward with our whole podcast setup here. And we've set lots of goals to be more efficient and more just better, just be a better podcast. We want to be awesome. A better podcast for you guys listening. Like we want to do that. We're not ready anymore, so we have time to really dive into this thing. But yeah, as always, thanks for listening, everyone, to Roar Lions Roar. If you have a moment to do so, please make sure that you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you see fit to use. Personally, I like Overcast and Spotify. I don't know about you guys. But if you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please also take the time to leave a 5-star review. Yes, you can do that on Spotify now. And if you can leave us a 5-star review and leave a comment, if you want to leave a question there, we will happily answer it on the podcast, no matter when we see it. Doesn't matter. You can leave a question about why does the plant behind Nick's head seem like it's constantly in a state of death and never recovering. I'll be happy to answer that question and more. Or why is Craig's photo so comically large of the stadium behind him? Why hasn't he moved back so you can see the whole thing? There's a lot of questions you could have. But if you could leave us a review, leave us subscribe, leave us that 5-star review. It'd be much appreciated. Helps get us in the ears of more listeners, and that is always a good thing. And just in case you forgot, go ahead and visit Home Field Apparel. Use that code ROARLIONSROAR, all one word, all caps at checkout for 15% off. And that will do it for our linebacker preview. For myself, Nick Pollock, for Craig Fritz, thanks for listening. Go State.